Hello. So I recently made a video, 33 and a day over 15. First of all, a little bit of explanation that the video there described a concept in very sparse detail. I call it returning to zero. And I also described a white room. The video is basically the end of a very long conversation I've had with myself over the years. There are some things that everybody deals with. What's really important in life? What really matters? What's the point of it all? Those kinds of things. We all approach it from different directions. You might say that your wife is everything to you. You might say that your job is everything to you. You have these things that really, really matter to you. I was dealing with that concept, and I've been dealing with that concept ever since I was a teenager. I would find something that I found extremely valuable to myself, but I would always have to face the fact that it really didn't mean anything to me. Here's the problem. I didn't really know what that meant. It's so confusing to look at this issue that I'm describing from the outside. It's hard to describe to someone who hasn't gone through the process, but I'll do my best. So here's the thing. I would fail at something and I'd be let down. I'd be frustrated because that thing I felt formed my identity. And I would have to grapple with the fact that this thing that I had formed my identity around, whether it's a job, whether it's a girl, whether it's something I owned, whether it's something I was pursuing, whatever it was, this thing that I attached value to formed my identity in some way. And when I lost it, my identity was affected. And I've been back and forth on this thing. It's like I didn't even know what question to ask. All I knew was I felt so despondent, so incredibly hurt, I guess is the word, when I lost that thing. Whatever it was I was attaching value to, I had lost that thing, and my identity was reciprocally affected. I had lost part of myself when I lost that thing. I think a lot of people feel that way when they, I don't know, lose a relationship with a woman or lose a job that they had put their heart and soul into, or they get downsized and now they have no job and they have no place to go. They have nothing to pour their hands into, and so they're stuck at home. They're just like, what the fuck do I do? Those kinds of issues, and it could be anything. It could be something as small as crashing a car that you really really love, that you'd been working on, and you built it from the ground up, and you crash it, and now it's worthless at that point. You lose that thing, it's gone, and loved ones is probably the easiest thing that you can use to describe this. You lose your father, who you have a very strong relationship with. You lose your mother. You lose a really close brother, a sister, or whatever. You lose that person, and now you're set adrift. You lose part of yourself when you lose that thing that you've attached value to. It's that concept that I've been grappling with. So what I did, here's the way that we humans do things. We form mental models of things to allow us to make predictions, to allow us to make sense of the world. One of the most common ways to describe this is a hunter. He creates a mental model of the gazelle he's trying to hunt down. And so he makes a model that when he throws the spear, the gazelle's going to run a certain distance, but his spear's going to be out in front of it. And so he makes this mental model so he can make predictions and act on the world, right? Making mental models is a very good way to approach problems. So I didn't do it consciously, but this is how it eventually ended up. I was making a mental model of this concept. I've been trying to grasp it because, like I said, I didn't even know what question to ask. I didn't even know how to approach this. It was a problem. I knew it was a problem, but I didn't even know how to approach the damn thing. So what I started doing was to figure out what the baseline is. So the first way I dealt with it was to create this mental framework, and I imagined. I'm sure you've all seen Star Trek, and you have those translucent walls. Maybe it's Tron, whatever. Imagine a translucent wall which is lit up with white light. In my mind, I had myself planted inside this six-sided cube. I called it my white room. In that room was me and nothing else. It was just me and nothing else, including thoughts. Thoughts were out. There was nothing in that room but me and my consciousness. That was my first mental model to conceptualize this thing. I wanted to clear out all those confusing ideas of value, those ideas of attaching value and therefore attaching your identity to something. That was what this white room was. It was clearing out all the distractions, all the complications, and coming down to an absolute point where nothing existed but basically you and your consciousness. You were left completely alone, secluded, and set apart. That was my mental model that I would go to really see what value really was. And like I said, this was so alien to me. I didn't even know what question to ask. It's so gripping. It's so painful to lose something you love. It's so painful to lose something you love that you've attached your identity to. Okay? And to deal with that, I would create this mental framework to try to get my head around this thing, to try to conceptualize it. And what I would do when I would experience that sense of loss from losing a part of myself, I had a mental framework that I could return to. So I would imagine my white room, and I would imagine myself in that white room, secluded. Okay, it wasn't a progression of getting away and mourning the loss of this thing, whatever it was. It wasn't. It was simply. It was like a word. It was like a statement. It was like this thing that I would just imagine. Okay, I wouldn't enter the white room. I would imagine the white room, and there was no identity connection to the thing I had lost. There was no anything. It was just a mental framework that I would simply imagine in my head, just to try to deal with and understand how this sense of loss and tying my identity to this thing that I'd lost, how this worked, what it was. And so that's where this idea of the white room started. Okay. And then what I would do is I would try to come up with words to describe and a vocabulary, if you will, to really think about and conceptualize this frustrating concept of lost identity. Now, no, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but if you think about it conceptually, if you imagine a place of total and complete seclusion, there is no loss. There is no identity. There is no anything. It's just you and your consciousness. There is nothing to define anything by. Okay? It is literally returning to zero. And that's sort of where I came up with this this vocabulary of returning to zero. When you return to zero, you have done away with all concept of definition. And the thing is, to me, this developed into a very powerful concept, which allowed me to grasp these frustrating things that just don't make a whole lot of sense. Why is it that we tie ourselves to things that we can lose? Why is it that we tie ourselves to anything at all? How do you find self-fulfillment? How do you find anything in this world of transient existence? It started after I left the religion that I was brought up in, and I really had to grapple with these concepts that religion automatically ruled out. Religion comes with this nice, neat, happy package of do's, don'ts. If you do, this will happen. If you don't, that will happen. Blah, 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 blah. Well, they're fucking wrong about almost everything that they say about the physical world, okay? If you leave that religion, you don't have that nice, neat package that they give to you on a silver platter. You have to start from nothing, and you have to start dealing with these concepts. So that's what I did. I started by dealing with these concepts, by creating this mental framework, this white room, where there was absolutely no definitions, there was absolutely no way to interact and define the world in any way at all, because there was nothing there but me, my consciousness, and just white light. I was just surrounded by white light, and it was just this mental construct. Okay, it's hard to explain. Pursue this line of reasoning, you might get what I'm trying to say. Okay, I'm sorry this is not very clear, but each individual's mind is never going to be clear to other people. As I said in my last Bloody Sleeve blog, you are the only person who really gets where you are coming from. Okay, so this is where I'm coming from. So if you get this, if you understand what I'm talking about, great. But I don't expect everybody to understand what I'm saying. So anyway, moving on. I've been grappling with this thing because I just didn't understand how to reason with this concept of time. What creates our identity in the first place? And then you go back and back and back, and you say, okay, my family, my culture, my religion, the things that I love, the things that I hate, the things that drive me, the things that motivate me, all those things define you. Most people are defined by external factors in their own minds, to one degree or another. I guess you could say that the Buddhist monks are probably the people that are the pinnacle of freeing themselves from these types of identities that we all seem to deal with. So back to the White Room. This conceptualized framework that I had developed in my mind was basically just a starting point that allowed me to look out and start over. Give me a starting line. And I didn't really understand why I was doing it. I didn't understand much of anything, but I knew I had to deal with it somehow. Somehow this mental framework of this White Room came up. And as I lived on, and as I have been trying so fucking hard to replace this concept with a proper mental model that really reflects reality, that really reflects the human experience, I guess. So basically, that's why, to me, that last video, it was so instructive. I'm going to shift gears down a little bit. I was introduced to MGTOW. My mind was opened to this new concept of going your own way and freeing yourself from the identity, essentially, that society had packaged for men. Society has said, men, this is who you are and this is how you will be. You will get married, you will be the provider, you will be stoic, you will be, they have all these expectations for men. Women as well. Society has certain expectations for women. Women, of course, have turned that to their own advantage, but that's another issue. So we are all faced with this as men. We're all faced with this meme culture where we are told what our identity is within that society. Now, this can be extrapolated to whatever it is that you tie your identity to. It could be your cat, for fuck's sake. It could be your bike. It could be your house. It could be whatever it is. Think about what it is that defines you. Okay? Just think about that for a second. That's no different than the way society has packaged your identity. It's simply the one that you chose. But it is equally as fragile as the identity that society chose for you. Men who are going their own way have turned their backs on that identity. Now they're going out to find the new identity. They're in the same boat. They're in the same boat. They have the same problems. They're going out to find a new identity. They're going out to find a new way, their own way. But it's the same thing. You're still defining yourself somehow. You're still tying yourself to something. You're still defining yourself by something, whether, I don't know, whatever it is that you've gone out to find to identify yourself with. You're doing exactly what society has done. You're simply putting your own label on it. That was the thing. I'm not saying everybody thinks this way, okay? I'm making that disclaimer now. I'm simply saying this is the newest development to this returning to zero, this White Room concept that I'm trying desperately to describe here. It's the same problem with a new face and a new label. What I realized, referring back to that last video with the aha moment that I had during the movie, the type of movie, which movie it was, it's not the point. It's irrelevant. The point is, I had this recognition, I had this vision, I guess you might call it, of what it was like when I was 15 years old. I had zero definitions. I had no definitions for what was important. I had no sense of I can't lose. I had no sense that failure was not an option. Failure didn't even occur to me as a 15-year-old. I was simply seeing what the world was really about. I remember as a 15-year-old, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't have these conceptualized things. Religion hadn't even really set in. I was very religious, but it had not internalized at that point. There was this internalization as I grew up where things became more permanent and consequences became more dire and more serious, and I learned, what the consequences of certain actions were. It naturally progressed to include things that I identified myself with. Okay? So, in the same way that you learn from a young age, don't touch a hot stove. How did we all learn that? Did we all learn that because somebody said, the stove is hot, don't touch it? No, of course not. We touched the damn thing, and oh my God, that hurts. And, we yank our hand back, and it hurts for a while. We learn from that. We learn from experience as children. We don't avoid, God, this is so hard. As children, we don't avoid consequences because we feel like we are going to lose credibility in our society. We don't. This concept that we have now as adults is a progressive scheme of building chains which define our mental limits. Let's take young person, old person. Okay, older person, experienced, he's an upstanding citizen in the community, and he never does anything that is going to put himself at risk because consequences. Young person, what the fuck does consequence mean? Let's take the natural death consequences out of it. Those are obvious, okay? Those are not our identities. Okay? That's a different issue altogether. Of course we learn what physical limitations are. We understand that through experience. We understand you jump off a building, you're going to die. We understand that. We watch other people do it. We know what happens when we jump off a small, bridge and we hit the ground and, oh my God, that hurts. Maybe we break a leg, whatever. We learn from experience. What was your mind that day when you jumped off that bridge? Your mind was not telling you, this is not who you are. This is not how you act. That was not what your mind was saying. Your mind was saying, let's see what this does. Let's see what happens when I jump off this small short bridge. Maybe you've seen those little rope bridges at the playground, right? Plastic rope bridges. You jump off of that, and let's say you land wrong and you twist your ankle. Now you don't do that, maybe. Or you learn how to do it better and you don't twist your ankle anymore. Children, that's how children learn. What adults do is very, very different than what children do. Children don't avoid consequences for the same reasons that adults don't avoid consequences. Adults avoid consequences for infinitely more reasons. The majority of those reasons are not physical, they're mental. Why don't you say this thing to this person? If I say fuck to this person, they'll get offended. And then what? What are they going to do? Hit you? What are they going to do? You avoid doing that because you don't want to offend them. That's one step closer to this concept. Now, an adult who has learned, or rather not learned, an adult who has internalized all this myriad of mental chains, mental inhibitions, an adult has very different reasons, completely non-physical reasons for what they do, don't do, what they pursue, what they don't pursue. It's a completely different paradigm, what an adult does versus what a child does. And I'm going to jump to the end here for a second. What I was getting in that video with was that is the right mental model. The child's mind, the child's motivations for what he does and why he does it is the right mental model for everyone to really have. Do you go to your job because you're excited to learn what goes on at that job, to learn more about that job? Or do you go to that job because you're afraid of the consequences of not having that job? I mean, that's sort of, I guess in a nutshell, what this is really about. The reasons we do things, the reasons we don't do things, the purposes and the drives and the motivations behind our actions have developed from this perfect humanness that we had as young children. It's developed into this walking chain dragger, this walking slave to our mental chains. That's why that video was so, excitable. Because I really finally understood what this white room was really all about. We tie our identities to things. That's what we're afraid of losing. Our minds are defined by the inhibitions that we put on there, not by the excitement that could be out there that we haven't seen yet, not by exploration, not by this extraordinary world that we have yet to really explore. That's not why we do things. That's what we did as a kid. As adults, we have taken all that fascination, all that amazement, all that excitement about discovering more, and we have confined it under this gigantic pile of change that we have built up ourselves, link by link by link. And we've created this gigantic chain that we drag around, which defines our borders. Again, I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking about this mental concept that I was really excited to finally have structure which reflected reality. That's what I'm really talking about. I can't even start to describe the exquisite freedom that I recognized in myself as a 15-year-old, looking back on it now. As a kid, I had no structures in my mind to define who I was. I simply was. And I did stuff. I wasn't afraid of anything. Of course, we're afraid of physical consequences. Again, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the shit that we have built up over time. I'm talking about the adult mind, not the child's mind. The child's mind is this white room that I kept going back to. It is what I call, again, returning to zero. As children, we are at zero. We have zero mental inhibitions, which we've built up for ourselves. As adults, that's all there is almost. We have lost that, I don't know, it sounds stupid, childlike wonder, that shit. That's actually what it is. It's childlike wonder with the world. There's this fascination, learning about something brand new. Okay, here's something stupid. I'm sure you'll love hearing something stupid. I got so excited when I found out that I could flush the toilet by dumping a gallon of water into it. Okay? I got so excited because I'd never seen that before. I had never seen that before. I was just like, oh my god, because I just never looked into how a toilet worked. And then I found out that it's just like a siphon. You siphon gas out of a tank. I knew how that worked, but then I realized that this is how a toilet works. Wow, oh my god, this is crazy. I had no idea. It was this something stupid, something simple, whatever, but it was brand new. It was the same experience I got in that movie. I was, like I said, I was giggling like a little kid through that movie. And if you want to know, it's the movie that I watched was Hardcore Henry. Fucking awesome movie, guys. But anyway, the movie's not the point. The toilet experience is not the point. Okay, I sit at home and I research how stuff works constantly, and I'm constantly amazed. I see how magnetic flux works. I'm understanding more about electromagnetism. I'm studying physics on my own. I'm not because I want to learn a bunch of equations, but because this shit is amazing. I've been doing this, but I was having trouble because I didn't understand why it was I couldn't conceptualize this thing that I didn't even know how to ask what it was. It was so frustrating. When you know something's there and you just can't fucking figure out what it is to even start to describe it. It was huge to me, man. And so that's what that video was really about. It was coming finally to the end of this never-ending frustration, not knowing what it was that I've been trying to describe for, I don't know, 15 years, I guess. You have a loss. You tie your identity to that thing, and it's gone. So I didn't really understand what that was. What is identity? What are we? What is identity really? In a word, what is this thing? So that's really what I've been trying to figure out. It's so broad and it's such a big deal because it affects people so deeply, you know? But now I understand what it is. I understand what that is. It's we progressively over time have created an identity for ourselves. And through that process of creating an identity, we have latched chain link after chain link after chain link that we have to carry around for the rest of our lives because we don't want to let go, because we've decided that this is who we are and you can't let it go. Now, this is not saying that to understand this concept now means that I no longer can have an identity. That's not the point. The point is understanding why and what an identity really is in a conceptualized format. An identity is everything from the point of zero. And when you return to zero, you have no identity. You simply are. Now, what do you do? What do you do when you have no identity? You do exactly what you did when you were 15, when you were 10, when you were 8, whatever it is. You know, everybody knows, everybody has at least a general idea of what it was like before you started creating an identity for yourself. When you return to zero, that's where you're returning to. You're returning to the point before you started creating or before you received, wrapped in a package, this identity that you now have, this framework that defines who you are. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your job, maybe it's your religion. Again, all these things that we carry around with us. It could be anything as simple as an inhibition. You don't want to say this, you don't want to say that because you might offend somebody. This gynocentric culture can basically be summed up as this thing, this people pussy begging and people, begging to be defined by the label crusaders, by the feminine hive mind. Define me, define me. Everybody wants a definition. What happens when you get rid of that definition altogether and you return to zero and you have no definition? What happens? I don't want to hear, I don't want to return. That's not the point. What happens if you do return to zero? Because everybody started out without an identity at some point. You know the day. You remember when you had no identity. You didn't have a thing to do. You didn't have a person to be. You simply were. You popped out of your mom's vagina one day, and here you are. You're probably cold, okay? And they're wiping you off. You're now an infant, and now you're growing up. And there's some point at which you start to develop these chains of identity that you decide to settle into. You wrap your brain, you wrap yourself in these chains of identity. I'm not saying that you have to get rid of it. I'm talking about conceptualizing it. And when you understand that you can return to zero, you don't have to have an identity. You free yourself from whatever it is. At least that's another option. If that made any kind of sense, congratulations. I'm glad that you were able to follow that because that was a bunch of gibberish. But I hope somebody gets what I'm saying. Either way, I had fun. I can't tell you the liberation that I finally have this definition that I've been seeking after for so long. Conceptualizing this concept. I guess it's really the concept of identity. Because when you want to know what something is, the best way to understand what something is to compare it to something that it is not. What is an identity? Compare it to something that is not identity. Try to do that. I think I finally did. So that's enough gibberish for me for one night. I hope somebody found this useful and enlightening. Thanks for listening.